I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Yves La Rose, CEO and founder of the EOS Network Foundation. Yves, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Hi, Ashton. Thank you very much for having me on. Really excited about this show.
Me too. I feel like there's a lot to catch up on. The market's been going crazy every which direction, and I'm sure your team is just still heads down working on this EOS Network Foundation. Let's just kick it off with a little bit on some of the solutions that your team is really focused on right now, and then we'll dive into everything into EOS.
Sure. So yes, you're right. The markets right now are a good opportunity to actually put your head down and continue building. And that's really what the ENF was created to do. So we came out of an ecosystem that was essentially starved of funding for the last 4 years. And upon the creation of the ENF, the EOS Network Foundation, it gave us access to the means to be able to make decisions, financial and non-financial decisions, in a very coordinated manner for the network, and to be able to accelerate that process of development, of not just maintenance, but also of growth for the network. So the ENF essentially is in charge of, or is in a way very similar to other foundations within the blockchain space, where it coordinates the code creation, the code maintenance, the development roadmap of that code base, but also outside of code, business development wise, in terms of directions for the network. Where should are there opportunities out there, and where should the network be placing some of its funding in order to be able to open doors, so that when an opportunity comes about, the network is ready for that. And so very much the ENF is really busy right now within, I guess, the current market conditions, not just to position ourselves for what's inevitably to come throughout these cycles, but more so as well catching up the lost time that the network has had over the last couple of years.
Great intro, Yves. And you're right, there's so much that the network foundation has to do in terms of like the departments on where it can help. And you mentioned there about allocating funding to the right projects and the proper projects. I feel like that's a huge one, to make sure that the capital goes to the right spot. And I know that there's other networks that have had big grant programs that ended up not being the best use of the capital. So I'm interested in that. But I would love to just get more of a high level on all of those areas of interest that you mentioned. Where do you specifically are focusing the most of your time in helping grow the network?
This is a really good question. So one of the advantages with somewhat being late to the party, in a sense, is that we're able to look at what other ecosystems did over the last couple of years. Importantly, what they did well, but also in a way more importantly, what they didn't do well, and where maybe they had some learning opportunities because they did something and didn't turn out to work out very much. And so we are really having that advantage of foresight, having the opportunity to look at others. And so we've developed, like you mentioned, we've got a grant framework, but others have grant frameworks and such. What we've done is be able to accelerate that process of creating the frameworks for the network to be able to accommodate the financial and non-financial support of businesses, individuals, and developers within the ecosystem, and creating them in a way that obviously is attuned to our reality, but also is very much cognizant of what others in the ecosystem, the greater blockchain ecosystem, have learned and have done. And so over the last 9 months with the EOS Network Foundation, we've laid out these pillars, or these different funding buckets, for example, to try and cater to different types of stakeholders. So we've got, obviously within the ecosystem, within EOS, but outside of EOS as well, we see these pockets of different types of stakeholders that are constant, and they emerge, and we see these trends and these patterns. And we've tried to create buckets for them, so that ideally when somebody comes to the EOS ecosystem, they get sorted in a way, or they get directed to the right mechanism that suits their particular needs as quickly and as efficiently as possible, so that we can deploy the capital in the proper mechanism that suits their particular needs within the shortest amount of time as possible. So we've done this through a grant framework. We've done this through what we call Pomelo on EOS, which is the equivalent of Gitcoin on Ethereum, which is quadratic funding created by Vitalik Buterin. So we have our own mechanism there. We also have a governance layer called Eden that is also getting funded by the network, kind of as an experimental layer of continual growth of governance on EOS that doesn't necessarily leverage the token holder weights, which is what is traditional in DPoS. And so we've got these different venues essentially that cater to different types of stakeholders. And all of them are being funded in a very coordinated and efficient manner because of that, I guess, advantage of foresight of being late to the party.
Very interesting. And throughout the last months, a lot of startups, I was talking to some other network founders, and in part because of the crash of the Luna ecosystem, there were a lot of startups there that were getting grants for that, and all of a sudden they had to move to other networks to build on. And I feel like this is a great opportunity for networks like EOS to have a bunch of startups, whether they're at 0.0 or they're already halfway to building something amazing, to move onto a network that is good for their needs. And I'm guessing that this was a great opportunity for EOS as well. Can you talk about, say it was looking through the eyes of a startup that needed to switch to a network that is great. What are they looking at, and how are you looking at them to make sure that the right projects are coming in and that they're easily integrated into the EOS network?
Well, so I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. It is really unfortunate what happened to Terra, not just because of within Terra and the Terra ecosystem, but the ramifications throughout the whole industry. It is definitely a learning opportunity for the industry to, in a way, level up after this. And for EOS, it really is an opportunity because we didn't have any liabilities. So again, going back to this idea that EOS wasn't at the party, EOS was really late to the party, we didn't feel any of those direct effects because we didn't have the partnerships with those chains that were all linked together through Terra, or that were providing some of the collateral and such. And so as much as that was a disadvantage over the last couple of years, it's turning out to be an advantage because EOS, the network itself, and the foundation being new and the way that it's set up doesn't have any liabilities. So what we are experiencing right now is very much what you just mentioned. It's an opportunity to be able to be the home of those developers that are now looking for somewhere to deploy on. And there are a few mechanisms by which we're trying to attract them. So one of them is that EOS never had deployed the capital, the resources, and the code to be able to be EVM compatible. And we know that by now, in order to attract the vast majority of developers, having that EVM compatibility natively at your L1 level is incredibly important, because Ethereum has done amazing work, and the Ethereum ecosystem has done amazing work over the last 5 years or so to be able to really be that bed for developers because of all the libraries they have and all the tools and the framing, everything they have, the access to funding that they've had as well. And so opening those doors up and making it so that those developers can very easily and efficiently come onto EOS is one of the things that we've been focusing on. So right now, the EVM, full RPC EVM compatibility layer is on a test net, and it is being deployed on our mainnet, and the roadmap for that is roughly September, October. So it's been running on testnet now for quite some time. So that's one mechanism that we're allowing people to come in, or we're opening the doors for developers to come in, businesses to be able to come in, and that would be the shortest path for a lot of them. Because if you're in one of these ecosystems and for some reason funding has dried out, or the costs become prohibitive because those networks for some reason have scalability issues for your particular use case, EOS becomes a very attractive use case for that, with an extremely low barrier to entry because of that full RPC EVM compatibility, where literally you're just double clicking a button, you're deploying your smart contracts on EOS, everything just works. No difference. You're still leveraging MetaMask, for example. The other way of doing so is when they're for example, in the what you mentioned with Terra, where maybe somebody had started doing the work, they weren't really deployed yet, they're not necessarily EVM compatible, or they weren't created using Solidity, and now they're looking for that extra push in terms of where do they go next in terms of directions. Then we have something like the grant framework that becomes available for those people, where they would come in and apply to the network. There's an open, transparent process. We've got a lot of funding made available. The process itself is relatively easy. It goes through a mechanism that's quite quick in terms of getting an answer, yes or no. If it's a no, feedback as to why no, people go back, and we've seen them, tweak some things in their application in order to align with where the network is going, accessing funding at the seed level without any equity in return, and being able to pivot very quickly from where they were to perhaps either on EOS, or what we're seeing a lot of it is multi-chain. So as of what you mentioned with the crash with Terra and such, the ramifications as well from what we've seen is, instead of applications putting all their eggs in one basket, we're seeing a lot of them starting to put this idea of being multi-chain, being compatible with a lot of different chains at once as part of their core mission mandate, so that should something like that happen in the future, they become much more resilient. And we are very much welcoming of that, because it has multiple effects. One of them, obviously, is if we're investing in a team, a product, or something, we also want them to succeed. It becomes a two-way street. And so if they become more resilient, that's better for us as well. If they have access to other funding elsewhere, these different networks are effectively subsidizing the same product. That's an advantage to each of the networks, because then it reduces each network's ultimate cost. But also it opens the door. These products now become bridges to these other networks, other communities. We know that in blockchain, community is, if not one of the most important variables out there. So having a product that's deployed on 3 or 4 or 5 different networks, accessing and tapping into those different communities opens up those communities to each respective network as well. And that's a huge advantage for each of them, while subsidizing potentially this. So we very much favor that approach, and we've been deploying a lot of capital into projects like this. So we've seen since Terra projects apply on EOS, projects that have either already deployed or were in the midst of deploying, and now they have to go back to the drawing table. And EOS is quickly becoming one of the beds for that, one of the homes for that.
Very cool, Yves. And you mentioned there about community and how that's super important. I'm curious if this is a project by project basis, or how it works between balancing projects being able to get easy funding and just giving them the capital, and hand holding them or giving them other help, and whether they're just getting help from the Network Foundation or also between other projects that are in the community.
So we see our role as being much more than just providing financial support. So financial support is great. Obviously, it's much needed. Developers need to, or businesses need to, ultimately at the end of the day, pay rent and go out and buy some food so they can feed themselves. So funding is a key aspect to that. But the way that we approach it is that we're not simply giving financial support to those entities. We're also giving them the non-financial support. One of the things that we've quickly learned to see over the last couple of years within the space is that we have a lot of really strong developer teams that are lacking some really key components to making a business thrive or an idea come to life. And so they might be strong on the development side, but they might have maybe some weaknesses on the project management side, or the communications, marketing, legal, any of those other components that are really key for a project to succeed. We're seeing that we are able to come in and complement, because we have access to those resources internally through sweat equity, through staff essentially, that are able to come in and provide that extra support that essentially can, in a way, it's very selfish, it can come and secure our investment at the same time. So it becomes really a win-win. It becomes a partnership. If the network, or any network for that matter, makes the determination that a particular project with the funding that they're requesting and what they're saying they're able to achieve, if the network makes the determination that if that were to come about, that it would be added value to the ecosystem, then doing everything else it can in its power within its own mandate and the resources that it has access to ensure that that happens becomes very, very relevant and very key. And oftentimes we see that the non-financial support is where most of the value is being created, because the financial support kind of gives that base for that team to continue going, to be able to pay staff and such. But the non-financial support really is what makes the difference between a B product become an A product, or a product being able to get traction versus one that just simply couldn't get traction because they couldn't reach the finish line and they're so close, and all they needed was that extra level of support. And so we place a lot of emphasis on that, so that it's much more of a holistic view and a holistic approach to support than simply the financial aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to hear, Yves. And I've seen a lot of projects that are often looking for strategic investors or some kind of other strategy on top of just take my money, because the more smart minds that can put their money in but also offer their expertise in the ways in the spots that they just need it. I think that's great to hear. Now with all of these new projects coming in and all the projects that are just being built since the beginning, are you seeing any major trends with like the next version of sustainable DeFi or NFTs or other industry use case apps moving to EOS?
Definitely. So let's say 2 years ago or so, we called it, summer of DeFi. Last year, everything was about NFTs. We're really seeing a convergence this year in terms of trend towards GameFi, that inevitable overlap between DeFi and NFTs in a way, leading towards the gamification of decentralized finance. And we're seeing that really come about this year. And so a lot of what we've been investing in, or that we've been seeing as applicants, is trying to fill up that space. So that the GameFi space that we're seeing. And this is where we believe not only are we investing resources in investing in projects that kind of fit those criteria, that are heading in that direction, but also more importantly, investing in the network to be able to accommodate that potential trend that we're seeing, or that inevitable trend that we're seeing. And so even the way that we are deploying the resources towards core code development or the other components. So again, outside of the financial support, the non-financial support, you also then have the chain itself. You have the product itself, the layer one, and all of that, how that's being essentially directed and where funds are going towards that, so that it can be accommodating to those projects. This is where we're also deploying a lot of capital and resources. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how that's playing out. And I feel like GameFi is very early on, with not a lot of AAA game studios or some of the major games that are already millions in revenue, even considering. I feel like they're being very cautious about starting to introduce kind of NFTs and DeFi into their traditional games that already have a huge user base. I feel like when that happens, that's sort of the next stage of integration between this amazing industry and that amazing industry.
Yeah, well, it becomes a huge opportunity, right? So gaming in terms of industry is one of the largest industries. It's massive. Gaming, it far exceeds, for example, television revenue or traditional media revenue. I mean, it's massive. And what we've seen, especially with the pandemic, is that industry grow even more. And where blockchain will come in, inevitably, I believe, be a viable home for a lot of the gaming industry, is that it just aligns incentives further between the game developers, the game studios, and then their users. So if the users can feel like they're a part of creating that game more so, and being able to capitalize on that, because there's a big component of capital in this, and that the game studios also see the benefit of having a more engaged user base that is effectively being incentivized to grow the game as well, and the game platform and the ecosystem and such, then we could see that in the short term, the game studios that I don't think are looking at the big picture could see that this could come and take away part of their profit. Those that I think will be successful will be those that'll see that the numbers that we're seeing right now in the industry will skyrocket by 10x, 50x, whatever it is, because now you're going to get more incentives. So the game studios will make more, the game developers will make more, but now the players will also take part in that ownership of whatever it is they're creating. And a big thing that we're seeing as well, outside of just the game itself, the GameFi, is the players' capacity to be able to organize in what is traditionally a DAO, but catered to the gaming space, which I've coined the Decentralized Autonomous Gamers Guilds, so DAGs. So it's this idea of implementing a technology, blockchain, and then kind of that UI layer on top of that of organization, a DAO, but specific to the gaming industry. Having games being able to leverage this on top of, let's say, the traditional NFT marketplaces and the assets marketplaces and such, is another offering that the game developers are going to start to make and are starting to make, so that just further aligns incentives. And this is where then you see a massive opportunity because of the number of players. It's a real use case. And in terms of level up, let's say, for the industry, that would be the next major one that we're seeing.
Incredible. And you're right about it's sort of a win for everybody, but I also feel as the real world market sort of has a lot of volatility. People that are playing games are just looking for more opportunities to earn capital, and looking at GameFi space, it's like, if you're already playing games, you might as well be getting something out of it, and I feel like
exactly.
A lot of the people that have been in cryptocurrency used to be gamers back in the day when we played games for days and days and really got nothing out of it. Right. And now they're building the future for the future gamers that can actually earn something. So I feel like we're giving back in a way.
Well, and we saw that during the pandemic. There are a lot of areas in the world that were really hard hit with either the economic effects of the pandemic, and they were found in a position where they needed to work remotely, and on the side they were able to start playing these GameFi games that already exist, that are already out there, supplementing their revenue by doing something like you mentioned, something that they were doing anyways, but now being incentivized to do so. And that capital doesn't come out of nowhere, right? There are people making money out of this, and so it's simply a redistribution of allocation of capital from within those industries, or from within that environment, that just aligns incentives just further. And really, that's what blockchain is about. It really aligns incentives on a level that we've never really seen before, because of that open transparency, but also because it just makes more sense for everybody involved, because they're less cost. The cost to market, or the marginal cost to operate, are reduced. So even if the gaming studios in this example keep more, there's still an excess of capital compared to traditionally, because they don't need to onboard, or they don't need to take care of the infrastructure, for example. The marketplace now runs on a decentralized network. There's no cost to them. So they've got a reduced cost. They can make a little bit more profit margin, and then the players can also get part of that profit margin, which then incentivizes more players to come in, which brings in more revenue and just creates that cycle, right?
With all of this said, with GameFi and having all these companies come in to receive grants and help, what are sort of the major milestones for the Network Foundation itself in your roadmap, in your growth?
Well, so one of the key pieces that we've been working on right now, or I guess one of the initiatives, there's three of them that I'll mention, or I guess four of them that I mentioned. One that I touched upon very briefly was EVM. So having that EVM compatibility layer, full RPC compatible, which effectively is just opening the doors to more businesses, developers, and individuals to come in. And so that's relatively an easy one. A second part of that is then we're incentivizing, over the last couple of months, we've deployed a lot of capital into research and development, leading to what we called blue papers. They were academic papers from within a particular subject matter expertise that we commissioned in the community. Leaders came about, they wrote these blue papers, and one of them is called Recover Plus. And the idea behind that one is we've seen a growth in the space as a whole in terms of hacks occurring. I think right now, or the latest number I saw was 1.6 or $1.7 billion worth of hacks. And so it's inevitable that there are going to be more hacks. So when we talk about these games, when we talk about these applications, it's inevitable that it's just, when is the next one? Mm-hmm. So what we've done in EOS is commissioned some research and development into when it happens, because it's not a question of if it's going to happen. So when it happens, what can the network do to be able to create somewhat of an insurance program, so that if something were to happen, what are steps that can be taken to either stop the hack from happening in progress, or potentially mitigate the hacks in the first place through certain things like bounty programs, white hat, incentives, that type of thing. So we've got the Recover Plus program. Another one that we have is Yield Plus. So we see that throughout the industry, token holders want to have base level yield, and they want to have it in a way that's sustainable and that's somewhat significant. And so when we look at other competitors, between 8 to 13% is where we find a lot of the yield that competitors are offering within their applications, within their, as close to the protocol as possible. Mm-hmm. So we've, again, through these blue papers, commissioned a team that worked over the winter months, came out with this 69-page report, very academic paper, focused on here's what yield programs would look like, and here's how the network would incentivize that. What are the parameters around that? How would people be able to participate? How do applications participate? And the whole goal around Yield Plus was to be able to create the environment so that applications themselves are the ones that are incentivized to be able to get more TVL, so more locked in value in their application. And if they meet certain criteria and certain threshold, then the network itself actually directs subsidies towards them so that they can offer greater yield, which then incentivizes more users to come onto those platforms and such. So those are two: Recover Plus, Yield Plus. And finally, the other component to this is the coalition. So EOS.io, the software stack itself, is used by multiple different chains. A few of those chains got together over the winter months and formed a coalition. So we have Telos, Wax, UX, and EOS have come together, and they've essentially taken on the responsibility of maintaining the code base, the EOS.io code base, and then further developing the growth of that code base. And the two large initiatives that we've now we sent out RFPs, we got some bids in, and we're now finalizing our faster finality and inter-blockchain connectivity. So the idea behind that is that these respective networks are all leveraging the same code base. Now they'll be able to connect to one another in a trustless manner, so that two chains can connect one another without having oracles, without having any type of trusted entity in between. So very trustless, because it's EOS.io to EOS.io, and there's a way to do that. But then also faster finality, so that the bridge or the connection between the two happens incredibly fast. So we're talking about either sub-second at the fastest touch point, or up to maybe 3 to 6 seconds on the lower end of things. But then having IBC alongside faster finality, you now start to have horizontal scalability to the tune that we've never seen before. So EOS in itself, EOS.io in itself, and EOS as the network is by far one of the most scalable blockchains right now to date. So if we look at historically how many transactions that EOS has done, at a certain point, EOS was doing 124 million transactions per day, which is more than all other blockchains combined. So in terms of sheer power of the software stack, it's incredibly powerful. Being able to then horizontally scale that, where if you had a particular use case for your application and you wanted to abstract some of that resource cost away, and you wanted to, you need even more than that, and you need even more accounts, and you just want to surpass those limitations, which are still by far greater than anything else by now, you would now be able to do so by having this faster finality IBC. So that is in the works, and that's part of the roadmap for the next 12 to 18 months. And those are really huge initiatives that are really going down to the core protocol in how the software stack itself was built, making modifications to it to just continue down that path of really being the number one leader in terms of scalability for a Gen 3 layer 1 blockchain.
Incredible, Yves. And yeah, connecting to EVM is sort of the first step, but full IBC and just compatibility between blockchains, so we can really be decentralized, cross-chain compatible, I think is super important, and I'm really excited to see that come to fruition throughout what you guys are working on as well. So thank you so much for working on that. For the viewers that want to follow along with those updates and learn about the community and the grants and other startups that want to work with the Network Foundation, what is the best way for them to learn more about all of this?
You can come and visit our website, so eosnetwork.com, www.eosnetwork.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at BigBeardSamurai. So Big Beard Samurai, that is the nickname that I got in Asia, and so that is now my Twitter handle. So very easy to remember, at Big Beard Samurai.
Amazing, Yves. And I will leave that in the description box below, as well as the EOS Network website. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. All the best with everything on the EOS Network Foundation, and let's follow up in the near future.
Thank you very much, Ashton, for having me on. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you again.